How are you guys doing? Man, be excited like God's in the house or something. Like, be excited. There might be some angels in here. You know what I'm saying? Like, any of you guys love that movie, Angels in the Outfield? Oh man, this is like one of my favorite movies. Now that might be like the product of growing up a pastor's kid, that this was like one of 2 movies I was allowed to watch. But I love Angels in the Outfield. In fact, I've been watching Angels in the Outfield like crazy this week. I've actually built a good portion of my theology on angels for this morning off of this movie. I think this is probably one of the more biblically correct movies you could find out there in regards to angels. I'm just messing, not even close. Not even a little bit. In fact, I think in many ways this shows in our culture how little we understand about this stuff. I think you watch movies, and every time you see a movie that has a demon in it, what is it usually? It's like a horror movie, right? It's the scary as it comes in it. I've noticed this, that usually about half the time there's a priest or a pastor in it that tries to cast out the demon or to kill the demon, and then they get killed or they get thrown against the wall. They have no power against the demon. You watch like angel movies, and usually they're pretty over the top and corny. And I've come to realize that we live in a culture that just does not understand this. We live in a culture that does not understand the supernatural. It's a realm, it's a dimension that oftentimes we don't want to dive into. And I think in most cases, we don't even believe it's true. I think even as Christians, hear me, I think even as Christians, a lot of times, we don't know if we totally believe it. Because we can't see it with our eyes, because we don't feel like we can experience, it's not something we can analyze and study and quantify. Sometimes we doubt if it's even real. It's not something we can put right in front of our face and study. I think this is a byproduct of the culture we live in. We live in a culture that we are the most advanced technologically and scientifically than we have ever been before, right? There's no humans that have ever lived before that are more scientifically advanced than we are. And so I think as a result, we live in the arrogance of that. And we think that we only understand things that we can study, that we can quantify, that we can write papers about, that we can do in a lab. And the more I think about this, the more humored I am by it, because what's funny is, for as advanced as we are in science, for as much as we know, there's also a whole lot that we have no idea. I don't know if you guys ever get into this stuff. I get into these kind of nerdy things sometimes. Like, my wife knows, I'll get obsessed with something for a while, and I will watch every talk there is, and I will read every paper, and she'll be like, when are you going to get out of this phase? And I'm like, I don't know, quantum physics, you know? And you study this stuff, and it's humorous. Actually, just a couple weeks ago, we were, for Memorial Day weekend, me and Chelsea, we went and we spent the weekend in a cabin with her parents, and we went hiking and did all kinds of things. And one of the things we did was watch the movie Ant-Man. Any of you guys watched Ant-Man? Oh, that's a good movie. And the guy that used to be Ant-Man, he's like the original Ant-Man, and now he's passing on to Paul Rudd or whatever, who's going to be the new Ant-Man, and he's talking about this, and he says, man, I've spent the last 30 years studying quantum physics. I've read every paper there is. I've spent my whole life trying to study this. And he says, all I've discovered is that we know nothing. And I remember chuckling at that, because it's true. For as much as we think we know, we still know very little. It's almost 3/4 of a century ago that we started diving into this idea of when we split the atom, what that's going to be. And we know that there's all this power involved in that. Obviously, we eventually did, and there was a lot of power involved in that. But our process, our idea was, man, if we can keep splitting this, if we can figure out what's inside an atom, if we can figure out the matter that makes that up, maybe we'll figure out the building blocks of life. Maybe we'll find the God particle. And so they split it, and they find these things called quarks, and they find out that's not even the end, that's just one level of a subatomic particle of an atom, that you can split that. And they get into these things called preons, which are super hypothetical. I'm sorry, nerd stuff. They're super hypothetical. They don't really even know a whole lot about them, other than they have all kinds of energy. Right now, they're trying to look through space because they feel like if they can find these preon clusters in their rare form, that they might be able to find these clusters that are about the size of a pea, which is funny to find that in space, but about the size of a pea, but would weigh about as much as the moon. And so like you watch documentaries on this kind of stuff, and you read stuff on this, and the most brilliant scientists in the world, not in America, in the world, talk about these things, and the best they can do is say, we don't know. We don't really know what it looks like. We don't really know how to dive into it. Now they've gotten to where there's over 100 levels of subatomic of just an atom, and they go, we don't really know what it looks like. We can't even compute matter that is that small. And it's funny, like when they really push them, they end up coming up with answers like, we don't really know, it just is what it is. For me, this is humorous to me. Because we live in an age where every agnostic that you talk to, every atheist that they talk to, what's the thing that they point to? Science. There's a lot of things that we understand. There's a lot of things that we have pushed forward. We have gone farther than anybody before us, but there's so many things that we can't even begin to comprehend, that we can't even begin to understand. And for as desperately as we want to look wise, we still look like fools. With the scripture, actually. 1 Corinthians, it says this. 1 Corinthians 1:18 says, for the word of the cross is folly, it's foolishness for those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. So he says this idea of the cross, this idea of a God that would give up divinity, this God that would give up his throne to take on our flesh and to take on our blood, to take on our emotions, experience our pain and our frustration and our hurt, just so we can have salvation is foolishness. There's no God that would do that. There's no God that pursues you and loves you. That's foolishness. That is fairy tale. Something that can't be quantified. It's not something that can be studied or analyzed. It's not something that's in a realm that you can see. It's not something right in front of your face. It's foolishness, is what it says. He continues, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? I think this is interesting. He calls us out, right? Where's the one that is wise? Where's the scribe? Where are your writers? Where's the great debater of this age? It says, where are your geniuses? Show me your geniuses. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Isn't this interesting? For as much as we study, for as much as we know, we still come up short. We still look like fools standing there saying, I don't know. It just is what it is. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God that through this foolishness that we preach to save those who believe. So what he says, you won't find your salvation in science. You won't find your salvation in a news article. You won't find your salvation in your friends. You won't find your salvation in the scribes and the debaters of this age. You won't find your salvation in the geniuses of your world. You will find your salvation in Christ. He says, and to the world, it will seem like foolishness. Even though it's the wisdom of God, it will seem like foolishness. And then he says, and God actually takes pleasure in this. He thinks it's funny that we see it as foolishness. I mean, God has a sense of humor. He thinks it's funny that he created the world in such a crazy, undefinable way that it looks like foolishness. He thinks it's funny that he decided that the way to find salvation was for God to come to the earth, to give up everything for us. And while we'll see that as foolishness, it pleases him. It says, for the foolishness of God, in verse 25, for the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. On God's most foolish day, he's wiser than all of us combined. On God's weakest day, he's stronger than all of us combined. And yet we look at what he does and we say, it's foolishness. Right? Is this not what our culture tells us? To believe in that is foolishness. I don't know how many times I've watched a debate of an atheist, and they constantly go back to, this is a fairy tale that you were told when you were a child and you haven't grown out of it yet. It's a fairy tale. It's foolishness. It's a joke. The same God that spoke and painted the skies with stars, same God that spoke on a DNA level, same God that spoke and created atoms that we can't even begin to figure out, says, let me show you what wisdom is. And I think this is what faith really rests on. I think if we're going to go through a book like Daniel, you got to understand faith. And I think this is where faith rests, right? In this weird, awkward tension of, it's not something that we can always see. It's not something that we can always understand. It's not something that always makes sense. It is what it is, and we put our trust in God. We rest in the wisdom of God. Not in this world. I think we search for wisdom in this world, but really it comes up empty. Where's wisdom found? Anybody know? Where's wisdom found? Here you go. Psalms 110:11 says this. It says, for the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Where does wisdom start? Starts when we begin to revere God. Starts when we begin to respect God and understand God and love God. That is where wisdom rests. So this is my challenge for you guys this morning. Quantum physics, it's fun. That's all for this morning, though. This is my challenge for you guys. So I challenge you guys to open up your minds a little bit this morning. Challenge you guys to open up your soul a little bit this morning. I think we live in a world that is so caught off from this stuff that we immediately put up walls, we immediately put up boundaries when we talk about something that's supernatural. We immediately want to go back to this idea of it being folly, of it being foolishness, of it being a fairy tale. But I promise you it's real, and I encourage you to open up your mind and your heart this morning, to be willing to go places that maybe you don't often let your mind wander to. Because I think God's going to do something if we let him. Let's pray. God, we come before you this morning. God, we come with, man, all of our junk. God, everything that we've dealt with this week, all of our mistakes, all the things we wish we could take back, we come here. God, I pray that we can come here with our doubts. We can come here with our struggles. That, God, we can be honest when we come here and say we don't always put our faith in it. That there's times that we doubt. There's times that maybe it is a fairy tale to us. That we come here from all different walks of life. Some of us have been Christians for decades, and we are steadfast in it. Some of us, we're just curious. We don't even really know. Some of us maybe we were Christians, and then we kind of fell off a little bit, and we're in this in-between zone. But God, no matter what, you love us, and you pursue us. And God, I pray that we would feel that on our heart this morning. God, take us to a spot where we feel uncomfortable this morning. God, take us to a spot that is new. God, let your presence rest here and let us feel it this morning in a way that is so tangible that we cannot deny it. In your name, amen. You guys ready? By the way, my name is Wes. I'm one of the teaching pastors here. Excited to have you guys this morning. We've been diving into Daniel, and Daniel's like a crazy book, right? Have you guys been reading along? Daniel's like a tough book, right? But really at its core, it's a very interesting story at its core, because really what Daniel is at its core is this group of people. It's these Israelites that have been exiled to a foreign land. But not just any foreign land, they're exiled to a land that is completely against their faith, to a land that is actively against what they believe. And the reason I think that this is beautiful is I think this is exactly what we find ourselves in, right? We find ourselves in a culture, we find ourselves in a land that is actively against what we believe, that is actively against the morals that we set forward, that is actively against the way that we feel we are called to live our life, a way that is trying to undermine us, that is trying to take things away from us. We live in that culture. We live in a culture that when we have faith in God, it is seen as foolishness. We live in a culture that sees us is someone that just doesn't understand, that someone that just hasn't grown up. There's like wacky religious Christian people. We live in a culture that is against us. So I think we can relate with Daniel. I think that's why it makes so much sense to us. Especially as we start to get into this latter half of the book where it gets really strange, because like the first 6 chapters are really, they're like kind of story driven, right? There's like an event, there's a choice, and then like Daniel and his friends are lifted up, right? There's something that happens. They have to make a choice to follow God or follow the culture. They choose to follow God, and then they're exalted at the end. And then starting a couple weeks ago with Jordan, when we hit chapter 7, it started getting a little bit different, right? All of a sudden now Daniel, instead of it being story-driven, Daniel starts to have these visions and these dreams, like these visions and dreams that aren't necessarily like good ones. They're like ones that wake him up in the middle of the night, and they freak him out, and they scare him. And we find almost at the end of every chapter that at the end he's just kind of confused. He's like, I don't know what's going on. And that's where we find ourselves, is kind of in this spot of, this is a little bit crazy. And it's difficult and it's hard, but I hope you guys have been jogging with us. So let's go to chapter 8, verse 1. And it says this: In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. So this is about 550 BC. This is a couple years after Daniel 7. Daniel's about 70-ish years old at this point, and he has this really kind of crazy vision, to be honest. It's kind of a crazy vision. We don't have time to really read through it. And then I found out I really don't have time because it's crazy. So this is my disclaimer for today, is we're going to skip over some things. And man, I encourage you, because there's so much in these 2 chapters. I encourage you to go back and read it and study it and look up commentary, look up other pastors on it. Dive into this, because I think these are some pivotal chapters in Daniel. I think these are some things that really open it up. But anyway, so there's this vision, right? So Daniel is asleep, and all of a sudden he begins to have this vision, and he sees this ram. And this ram has 2 horns, and one is longer than the other. And the one that was longer than the other came up second. And it's running around. It's running around like crazy. It's going in every direction. It's trampling everything that comes before it. Nothing can stand against it. It is like man of man. Like it is beast of beast. Like nobody can touch this thing, right? It is the most powerful thing out there. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here comes this goat from the west. And this goat has 1 horn. And this 1 horn he takes and he rams the ram with it, which is funny. He rams the ram. He rams the ram with it, and he tramples and he kills the ram, and he shatters its 2 horns in the process, right? It's like, what in the world is going on? Imagine having this dream. You're like, I should not have had Taco Apocalypse last night. This was like a bad call. And it shatters these 2 horns. It kills the ram. It says the goat becomes like stronger and stronger and stronger. And right at like the peak of its power, right when it's leveling up, it's like Pokemon, I don't know. Right when it's like leveling up, it's like the top of its power, its horn suddenly shatters. Weird, right? And out of that horn come 4 other horns that are smaller. Then one of these horns begins to grow larger and larger and become powerful, and eventually tramples the stars, and it says overturns God's sanctuary. Makes sense, right? We don't even need to dive into like interpretation. Like you're good, right? Like seriously, imagine having this dream. I think of this stuff. Like I put myself in this situation. Imagine you go to sleep and this is the dream you have, and you feel that this is a dream from God. You have got to be like, what in the world? This is weird. This is messed up. I don't understand. I'm confused. And Daniel's in the same boat. He's like, I have no idea. I don't know if they had Taco Apocalypse back then, but he's like, I should not have ate that. That leftover pizza, it did me wrong. It says this in verse 15. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened, and I fell on my face. And he said to me, understand, O son of man, this vision is for the end of time. And so Daniel, he wakes up, and he's like, this makes no stinking sense. What in the world? He's confused. There's a very interesting line in here. It says, and I, Daniel, I sought to understand it. I think there's many things in our lives that we don't understand. I think there's a lot of things that happen that we don't understand. And you know why we continue to understand it? Like, hear me this morning. You know why we continue to not understand it? Because we don't seek God for the understanding. We go to our friends. We go to the internet. We go to celebrities. We go to movies. We go to music. We go to news. We look up documentaries. We do everything but go to the source of life. I think so many times we walk through life confused on what's going on in our life and why did this happen and why does this not make sense, and I'm so confused right now, we never seek God about it. And man, I'm telling you, I think if you are willing to seek God about things that are going on in your life, I think he's going to reveal them to you. Because that's what we see here, right? Here's Daniel like, mind blown, I'm confused, what in the world's going on? This doesn't make any sense. There's a ram and there's a goat and they're ramming each other, which is funny again, and their horns are breaking. I'm so confused. What in the world? He doesn't Google search it. He doesn't go to his friends. He doesn't look up celebrity gossip. He seeks God. I seek understanding from God, and what happens? An angel shows up to give him understanding. We need to seek God for understanding in our life. So I see this. I think this is something in the church in America that we do not do. We do not seek God. We want to go everywhere else, which is so odd. We want to go everywhere else, but we do not want to seek God. We need to seek God. Daniel seeks God. Angel shows up. And not just any angel, Gabriel shows up. Gabriel is awesome. He's one of only a few angels that are actually named in the Bible. Gabriel is the same angel that will eventually go to Mary and say, you will become pregnant, and his name will be Jesus. He's the same angel that goes to Zacharias and says, your wife will become pregnant, and you will name him John. He will be John the Baptist. Gabriel's a big dude. It's a big name. Gabriel comes to him. Gabriel says, I'm going to break this down for you, bro. And he begins to explain it. Again, I thought I was going to go through this. I thought I was, so I had all the verses. But I'm just going to explain it real quick. And so Gabriel comes in, and he says, this ram with the two horns, this represents the Medo-Persian Empire, which is the most powerful empire at the time. And the reason that the one horn is bigger than the other horn is because even though Persia came later, it's actually much stronger. So this is that empire. It says this goat that comes from the west with one horn, that is actually Greece. Makes sense, coming from the west. So here's Greece coming in. It says that one horn is the king of Greece, which now we know is Alexander the Great, who was the first conquering king of Greece. He begins to walk through this. He says, and then the goat that shattered the two horns, it destroyed the empire, right? And those of us that know history a little bit or Googled it, we know that the Greek Empire came in and destroyed the Persian Empire in about 329 BC, which is about 220 years later from this vision, which is crazy because you start to see like this stuff playing out. You start to see a God that is moving chess pieces and knows what's going to happen before it happens, which is craziness, right? Some may say it's foolishness. And then he says that this goat that is growing stronger and stronger and stronger, and then right at the height of its strength, the horn is shattered. That's Alexander the Great, right? And those that know history know that Alexander the Great died at a very young age and very suddenly at the height of his power when he was just 32. Actually, he died in the palace of King Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon. Just fun side fact. It says this is Alexander being destroyed, and then these 4 small horns that come up. If you read the history books on this, there's about 40 years of infighting between that empire, of the successors fighting over who was going to take over before they eventually split it into how many? 4 generals. Crazy. Do we not understand that God knows stuff that we don't? I mean, that's craziness, right? This small horn that eventually rises up, this is Antiochus IV, which I probably butchered that name. This is Antiochus IV, and this guy was crazy. He was insane, and at one point, he actually goes into Israel. He actually goes into Jerusalem, and the first thing that he does, crazy, the first thing that he does is he goes into the holy temple, and he sacrifices a pig on the altar, which in their culture, a pig was what? It was unclean. He knew that. He's like dissing them about as bad as you can diss them, right? It's profaning the altar of their God, of Yahweh. He killed many of them, did all kinds of cruel things. He took the holy temple and he turned it into a pagan temple. He overturned God's sanctuary. And so here you see that being played out of this horn that comes in and it tramples the stars, it tramples the saints, and then it overturns God's sanctuary. It mocks him to his face, and this is about 167 BC, so about 380 years after this was written. Think about that. 400 years into the future, God is speaking through Daniel. And yet we look back and we say it's foolishness. Who's the fool? And it's so interesting because you can imagine like Daniel being so confused, right? Even at the end of this chapter, in verse 27, it says, "And I, Daniel, was overcome," which makes sense. I mean, if you hear about the breakdown of all the empires and who's going to be destroyed for the next 4 centuries, that'd be a lot. That'd be a lot. More taco-apocalypse, probably. "And lay sick for some days. Then I rose up and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision, and I did not understand it." So Daniel, still doesn't get it. Which I think, we look through our lens of history, right? Like, we have history as an aid, and we can look at it and we can say, wow, this is, really clearly defined prophecy that God laid out hundreds of years in advance. This is crazy. But if you're Daniel, this doesn't make any sense. Because at this point, Persia is like beast among beasts, you don't mess with them. Greece is this tiny little thing that nobody cares about. And yet suddenly here's this vision about Greece rolling through and taking down the most powerful empire of the time. Right now they're under Persian captivity. They've taken over Babylon. He must be thinking this is craziness, right? He says, I was appalled by this vision. I'm appalled by this idea of someone that's going to rise up and destroy the sanctuary of God. I'm appalled by this beast that seems to just run wild. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think sometimes we're the same way. I think even with Scripture right in front of us, even with something that we can read and we can articulate it, we can look back at stuff like this and we can make it make sense, we struggle with the idea of it. We struggle with the idea of this is real. This is true. We struggle with the idea of dimensions that we can't see and realities that we can't see, of a spirit realm that we can't see. We struggle with it. And I think, man, I get that. Man, even as a pastor, just being real, even as a pastor, I ain't never seen no angel. I ain't seen no demon. I've never walked up and been like, hey, JC, what's up? That's never happened to me, which would be cool. But that's like never happened to me, right? To like place my faith in it. And I think sometimes that is not easy, if we're honest, right? Sometimes that's a struggle. Sometimes it's a struggle of things that we can't see, but I know that it is real. And I think just because we don't see it doesn't mean that it's not right in front of us. I think that's the interesting thing about it. So do you guys not realize like the presence of God rests in this room right now? Right? You're not seeing gold glitter flitting around, but I'm telling you the presence of God is right here. And I think sometimes we don't understand that. I think sometimes we take it for granted, maybe. We don't realize that there could be something in front of us that we don't even see. In fact, in Hebrews 13:2, it says this. It says, always be hospitable to strangers, because you never know when you're entertaining an angel. How crazy is that? There could be people that you have been kind to, that you have served, that you have done something for, and they were actually an angel, and you didn't even know. And yet we think because I can't see it, it's not true. But I promise you it is. I had a thing happen to me a while ago. I debated telling this story. I'm just going to be honest. I debated even like telling this story. I've told it to a few people in my like life group and stuff like that. I told Jordan. Jordan loves this stuff, and Jordan's like, go for it. But I had this thing happen, and this is how I know that it's real. This is like for me how I know 100% that it's real. So some time ago, right when I had first become a pastor, man, that is a long time ago now. I used to be able to say, yeah, when I became a pastor like 4 years ago. Now it's like, man, when I became a pastor 9 years ago. Good Lord. So when I became a pastor almost a decade ago, there was a point right afterwards that I went to a tattoo parlor, like you do, and I was getting ready to get a tattoo. I was getting a tattoo of Scripture on my arm, like pastors do. Which is really funny, because you know what? Like, when I first became a pastor, I remember going to, like, pastors' conferences and stuff, and it was, like, really taboo to have, like pastors that have tattoos. Now it's like every hipster pastor has them. And I'm like, man, just lay off, all right? Like, I had to do this long before you. But, so I'm getting this tattoo done, and she asked, like, what I do and who I am. I'm like, oh, I'm Wes. I'm a pastor. Like, this is some Scripture that I'm getting put on my arm, like, you know, and I'm talking to her about Jesus and the gospel, like you do. And I'm like, so what else do you do? What do you do for fun? And she starts to tell me how she's a witch, and she does seances. She talks to demons. She lives in like this old abandoned schoolhouse that she bought that suicides took place there. And I'm like, okay, so I just keep talking about Jesus, right? Like what you do in that situation is you keep talking about Jesus. So I just keep talking about Jesus, and I'm like, man, he loves you and he died for you, and you know, and I'm going on and on about like the Scripture that's getting done and how his desires towards me, and he pursues me, and he loves you, and she's like, yeah, that's great, and she's about halfway done, and she goes out to take a smoke break, and she comes back, and she's like, hey, my friend just called me. Is it cool if she comes too? And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. What do I care, right? She goes, oh, yeah, and she does tarot card readings if you want one for free. And I'm like, nope. No way. Don't want to do that. I'm good. But she can come. She wants to come. That's cool. Whatever. So here I am in the tattoo parlor, tattooed by witch, and her friend walks in. This is what happens. I kid you not. This is what happens. So she comes and she walks in. She opens the door and she looks in and she leaves. And I'm like, this is kind of weird, right? And so like I'm watching, and she comes and she opens the door and she looks in and she leaves. And I'm thinking, this is weird. Like I'm trying to think through like books that I'm reading. Is this like how witches enter a building? I don't know what's going on here. Do you have to like enter 3 times? I don't understand. I'm so confused, right? I'm like praying underneath my breath. I'm like, this is crazy. And she walks in, she does it again, and she leaves. And I'm like, is your friend okay? And she's like, I don't know. So she like stops what she's doing and she goes out and she talks to her. And they come back in together. And this is what happens. I kid you not. So this woman, she comes back in and she opens the door and she looks at me. And she says, you need to leave. You need to leave right now. Right? I'm like, oh man, I'm in the den now. Wes, you're so stupid. I'm like, this is crazy. And she leaves again. And she comes back in. And she points to me again and she says, you need to leave. You need to leave right now. So I look at her, I'm like, what did I do? Did I offend you? I'm thinking like her friend told her I'm a pastor and she's like angry or something. I have no idea what's going on, right? And she looks at me and she says, there's angels flying all around this room. There's one standing behind you that is enormous, that is protecting you. You need to leave right now. Can't make this stuff up. I didn't see it. But I know that it was true. You look at the situation, you look at this woman, I'm like, this is 100% true. This is crazy. I still to this day don't know if there's like angels that like follow me around or if like God was like, Wes put himself in a stupid position and I'm going to help him out. You guys just go do your thing. There's some witches coming. He's going to need some help. He's only been doing this for 1.5 years. He doesn't know a lot of scripture. You guys just go do your thing. Probably about right. And so I look at this and I know, man, this is real. Just because we didn't see it, I didn't see it, but I promise you it was happening. Just because we don't see it in front of our face doesn't mean that it's real. But this is the beauty of it. When we talk about this stuff, does it make us a little uncomfortable? Probably. Is it a little bit weird? Probably. But here's the beauty of it. If it's true, then that means all the words of God are true. If God says that there's angels and there's demons and there's a world that we don't see, there is prophecy that's going to happen that you don't understand and it's true, then that means it's also true when he says that one day, right now, you may be experiencing all kinds of hurt. You might experience all kinds of suffering. There might be cancer in your body. There may be all kinds of things going on with you. But one day, I'm going to cast Satan down, and it'll be done. You know what? Those words are true. If he says that one day, I have heaven prepared for you because I love you, and I care about you, and I want you to have the best of the best, and I have prepared it for you. You know what? It is true. If he says, I look at you and I know everything that you have ever done, everything that you're ashamed of, all the things that you would never tell another person in your soul, that in your life you would never, ever tell, all the things you wish you could take back, all the hurts, all the pains, all the mistakes. He says, I know them all. I know all the ones you're going to make, and you know what? I still love you. I still pursue you. I still died for you. It may seem like foolishness to some, but I take pleasure in the fact that I pursued someone that didn't love me, that didn't care for me just because I wanted to show them how valuable they were, that I wanted to look at them, as it says in Ephesians, and say that you are a masterpiece that I created, and I love you, and I care about it. It means that all of the words in this entire book are true. So it may be weird, it may take us out of our comfort zone, but for me, that's like awesome. Because sometimes we need to be taken out of our comfort zone. I thought about this for a long time, and even for me, this is like one of the things that I struggle with, man. It is hard for me, but I think that we live in a culture that wants to diminish the supernatural. It wants to take that aspect of your faith away so that you cannot walk in it. And it's one of the most powerful things that we have. It's amazing. Chapter 9. Verse 1 says this. In the year of Darius, the son of Vicius, by descent of Amidai, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, who always talks in the third person, that Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet must pass before the end of the desolation of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So here we find ourselves in Daniel. It's about 11 years after chapter 8, and Daniel begins to realize that their time of captivity is almost up. And I think this is interesting because what that means is he's remembering the word of God from his youth. Right? If he was captured and taken to Babylon around 14 to 16 years old, that means he's remembering the scripture that he learned when he was young. He remembers the prophecy of Jeremiah from when he was young. And Jeremiah, in this Judea culture, he was actually still speaking when Nebuchadnezzar showed up. So he's remembering the words of this prophet from when he's a child. He's remembering what Jeremiah said. And Jeremiah said, because of what we've done, because we've done as a nation, because we have turned from God, because we have not repented, because we've done things that we shouldn't do, that he's going to allow the king of Babylon to come in and hold us capture for 70 years. And here's Daniel towards the end of his life, and he's looking back and he's remembering, oh my goodness, we're only a couple years away from this 70 years being up. God's going to break us out of this. Our captivity is almost finished. So what does he do? I think this is awesome. Verse 3 says this, I turned my face to the Lord, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God. I made confession saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenants and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned, we have done wrong, and we have acted wickedly, and we have rebelled, turning aside from your commandments. We have not listened to your servants or your prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings and our princes and our fathers. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us, open shame. So what does he do here? He sets aside time. He sets aside like this time, this very intense time where he begins to pray for his nation. He begins to pray for his people. I was reading this, and this was convicting for me because I think, man, do we do this? Do we really pray for our nation? Brett brought it up one of his first weeks. Do we really pray for our nation? Do we bash our nation? Do we just complain about Obama and Hillary and Sanders and Trump and the list goes? Do we just complain about them, or do we pray for them? Do we cry out for our nation? Because here you can imagine Daniel. Daniel's intense. You can imagine him getting on his knees in his little loft apartment and crying out to God. Saying, God, please save my nation, save my generation. We know that we have done wrong. Which is maybe one of the most interesting parts. He doesn't try to make excuses. He doesn't try to set aside the blame, but he says, we know that we messed up. You sent your servants, you sent your prophets, you sent your pastors, and we didn't listen. Continue to do whatever we wanted to do. Now, as a result, we're stuck in our captivity, but God, I know that you're about to bring it out of us. You're about to break these chains. You're about to break this captivity. God, I'm calling it out right now. I'm calling it out on my nation. I'm calling it out on my generation. This is going to happen. I think, man, do we do this? Seriously, I don't mean to be a jerk, but when is the last time you prayed for your nation? When is the last time you prayed for your generation? When is the last time that you prayed for this city? So I think this is what we do. We go, God, our city, what in the world is going on here? Man, there's so many suicides, and there's so many murders, and there's so much junk going on. How can you not show up? And yet we don't pray for it. We look at a generation that is caught in captivity, one that is continually in a cycle of divorce and self-harm and hatred and hurt and pain. And we think, why is God allowing this to happen? But we never lift up this generation. We never get on our knees and pray for them. And we just look at God and go, but God, we need to be praying for our nation. We need to be praying for our people, because that's the first thing he says. He says he turned his face towards the Lord and he prayed. And he dove into this idea of sin. He said, God, I confess it. I don't hide it. I don't try to make excuses for it. Here it is. We are sorry. Please take it from me. And I think, is this how we deal with our sin? Or do we just make excuses? Any fool can make excuses. Do we make excuses, or do we honestly want to deal with our sin? Can I tell you something about this tattoo story? So one of the things that messed me up the most for the longest time with this, that I thought about and I thought about and I thought about, wasn't the fact that I didn't get to see the angels, which would have been cool. It wasn't the fact that I didn't get to see it. This is what bothered me. This is what got me the most, is I always wondered, why did this woman open this door, see the presence of God, see angels, see glory that I have never seen yet? I've given my life to this, but I've never seen it. She saw it. How can you open the door to that and see it and walk away from the presence of God? How is that not a moment that you get on your feet and you're like, oh, I messed up. I'm so sorry, God. How is that not the moment? How is that not the moment of salvation where somehow her life is changed in that moment? And I thought about that for the longest time. I thought about that for years. For years, I was like, how can you see angels? How can you feel the presence of God and run from it? And eventually I felt this, hear me. She had become more comfortable with her demons in the presence of God. She experienced the presence of God. She saw the presence of God. She was more comfortable with her demons. Hear me. Every Sunday we walk in here, we experience the presence of God. We feel it, we know it, we're saturated in it. And then we go out there, and suddenly our lives look very different. Suddenly we're willing to curse a lot more. Suddenly we're willing to sleep with people that we're not married to. Suddenly we're willing to look up things that we should never look up. Suddenly we're bitter and angry towards people. Do you know why? We are more comfortable with our demons sometimes than we are the presence of God. Sometimes we are more comfortable with our lust than we are the presence of God. We are more comfortable with our gossip than we are the presence of God. We are more comfortable with our greed and our money than we are the presence of God. We are more comfortable with our selfishness than we are the presence of God. Think about that. That's harsh, but think about it. Hear me. How often do we do that? We walk in here and we experience it, and this should be a moment where you say, God, my life has changed forever. And then we go out and we go right back to Him. We go right back to our junk. But this is not what Daniel does. Daniel says, remove this from us. Remove this from our generation. Remove it from me. Be done with it, God. We want to be righteous before you. We want to be pure before you. God, let us be a light in the darkness. God, this is something huge that is inside me. In fact, it was the same Jeremiah that said, this is fire shut up in my bones. I got to let the word out. I got to tell people about this. Do we act that way? He says this in verse 18. This is beautiful. He says, "O Lord, according to all your righteous acts," it's not me that's righteous. It's not me that can do good. It's not me that can get rid of my sin. God, because of your righteous acts, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city. Turn away from Jerusalem. Turn away from your holy hill. Because of our sins, for the iniquities of our father, Jerusalem and your people have become a byword among all who are around us. Now therefore, O our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his pleas for mercy. And for your own sake, O Lord, make your face shine upon your sanctuary, which is desolate, because everybody has fled from its presence. Oh my God, incline your ear to hear. Open your eyes and see your desolations, the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. But he desperately pleads for his city. You know what this tells me? Is he is living in a culture that tries to isolate him, that wants to take away his faith, that wants to marginalize him, that wants to take away what he believes and say it's foolishness, and yet he desperately cares for them. These are not, like, for the most part, a lot of people that are really kind to him. He's been a captive for 70 years, and he prays for them. Desperately, he prays for them. How desperate are you for your city? Do you really care about your city? Because I can promise you, you meet people on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, that you have opportunity to speak into their lives. This last week, I shot a video for the barber that I go to in downtown. I was their hair model. Just wanted to throw that out there. But honestly, I was thinking about this. And I thought, you know why they asked me? I'm probably not the best looking guy that he gives a haircut to. I probably don't have the best hair, but I have favor with them. Do you know why? They live a life that's very different than me. They have morals that are very different than mine. But man, I love them. And I care for them, and I don't judge them, but I desperately want them to know Christ. They all know that I'm a pastor. I talk about it constantly. I'm like trying to invite them like crazy. I'm tossing out cards like it's Pez, you know? Like, come on, guys, come to church. Seriously, I kid you not. I borderline beg them to come. Because I love them. My heart breaks for them. I hear their stories. And I hear the pain that they're going through. And I hear all their junk. And I think, man, if you just knew Jesus. If you just knew that kind of love, you want to be stuck in this crap. You want to be stuck in your bondage. You want to be stuck in this Babylonian and Persian bondage. Be free in Christ. Because when he sets you free, you're free indeed. Guys, I just want you to hear it. Do we do that? The other day, I walked to Target. I don't know why I walked to Target. I don't like to walk. But I walked to Target. We live near Merle Hay Mall, and it was late at night, and I walked to the Target. My wife needed contact solution. So I walked to Target, like you do, for contact solution. And I'm walking back, and in between one of the buildings, there's a homeless man, and I'm talking to him. Gave him my ice cream sandwich that I just bought. Because I can't just buy contact solution. Give him my ice cream sandwich. I said, man, I don't know you, but I want you to know that God loves you. Man, that you're a masterpiece. I don't know what God has for your life. I don't know what it looks like, but I tell you, he has a destiny. I don't know what other people have spoken over you and how much they've talked down to you, but God loves you. I walk a little bit farther, and I cross through like this parking lot, and there's this mom with a stroller that's pushing it, and she's on the phone just yelling at someone. I didn't want to be that guy. I know that much. And I'm watching, and my heart broke. Because this is our city. We are the ambassadors here. There's no one else that's going to do it. It's not up to the people from Chicago to come here and be ambassadors in our city for Christ. It's not people from Cedar Rapids that should come here and be ambassadors for Christ in our city. This is our city. This is our brokenness. This is our hurt. There's this beautiful scripture that says that when Jesus looked out on Jerusalem, he wept. Jesus wept. He saw the city, and he saw the hurt, and he saw the brokenness, and he saw the pain, and he said, man, I want to bring healing. I want to bring restoration to you guys. I want to lift you up. I want to take my glory, and I want to give it to you. I want to take my righteousness, and I want to give it to you. All you have to do is believe. Do we do that? Do we care enough? I'm going to have to cut some stuff. I'm going to end with this. In verse 20, it says this. When I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin, the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord on the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, Gabriel, whom I'd seen in the vision of the first, came to me in swift flight. Man, it must be cool to be an angel. He just flew there. No big deal. Came to me in swift flight. At the time of the evening sacrifice, he made me understand, speaking with me and saying, O Daniel, I have now come to you to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell you. This is crazy. So this is what this whole thing boils down to. All these crazy things that he's seen, all these things that he doesn't understand. He can't put his finger on it. He's like, I don't understand. There's this ram, there's this goat, and this is crazy. I'm confused. When Gabriel comes, he says, this is what I give you for understanding. You are greatly loved. Isn't that beautiful? Now I want you to think about this. We go through all kinds of stuff. Is that not true? We go through hurt. We go through pains. Things happen in our bodies that don't understand. Things happen to loved ones that we don't understand. Things happen in our world that we don't understand. Things happen in our life that we don't understand. I think most of us, we'd probably pick a different path for our life if we had an opportunity. Like, I don't think, even Daniel, this was probably not the path that he would have chosen for his life. Like, oh, about 15, I'll get captured, turn into a slave, and be a slave my whole life. That'll be good. I'm down for it. Like, he probably wanted a different path for his life, right? He's probably confused, like, why did this happen? I think we can look at this stuff, we can say, why is it like this? Why is it not different? We're so confused. And this is what God says to us. You are loved. You are greatly loved. And I think this is beautiful because this essentially, better close it because I'll keep reading. This sums up the gospel. Through all of our confusion, through all of our junk, we chose captivity. Rather than repenting and believing in Christ, we chose captivity, and we lived in that captivity for years. We have stories of that. We have scars of that. We have things that we wish we would have done it different. But then Jesus shows up on the scene. He says, I've come to take on your flesh, and I've come to take on your bones, and I'm going to look like my creation. I'm going to live amongst my creation. I'm going to experience what you experience. I'm going to experience hurt in my body. I'm going to experience tiredness. I'm going to experience temptation. I'm going to experience betrayal. I'm going to experience these things so I can give you something in return. It says, I'm going to experience betrayal so I can give you love. I'm going to experience brokenness and hurt so I can give you healing. I'm going to experience what it feels like to be lost so that you can be found. He says, I'm going to go to the cross and I'm going to die so that you can live. And I'm going to take my glory and I'm going to wrap it around you. Hear this, man. I think there's a lot of us in here that we are ashamed of things that we've done. We're hurt by it, and it holds on to us. And he says, I'm going to wrap my glory around you. So that is not what you feel. That is not what people see, but they see my glory. He says, I'm going to wrap my righteousness around you. This is why it's called good news. Because what is the news? You are greatly loved. Let's pray. God, we're so thankful. God, that you would love us and that you would care about us enough. That, God, you would make Scripture so clear that it's undeniable. That you would make prophecy so clear that it's undeniable. God, I pray even as we sit in this room, which, God, I have to believe is saturated with your presence. God, I pray that we are a people that we do not leave your presence when we leave here, but we take your presence with us. That, God, instead of turning back to our old junk when we walk out of these doors and leaving your presence, that we take your presence with us. We take it to our culture. God, that we take it to our world. We take it to our Starbucks. We take it to our colleges. We take it to our workplaces. God, we tell people they are greatly loved. That, God, we care about people, even if they've hurt us, even if they've shunned us, even if they've marginalized us. God, that we can do like Daniel, that we can do like Jeremiah, that we can do like you did, and we can love them in spite of it. That, God, we can point a world towards you. God, I pray that this ignites conviction in us. God, that this puts a fire in our bones, that we want to go home and we want to pray for our world, that we want to pray for our generation, that we want to see things happen. God, that we don't want to just talk about it. We don't just want to say, that'd be cool. But we want stuff to happen. God, we want to see a generation come out of their bondage. That's really the story of Daniel 9. He wanted to see a generation come out of their captivity. God, we pray the same. God, we pray for a generation that their captivity time is up. That, God, you are going to come in and you are going to break chains and you are going to break bondages, that we will be your people and you will be our God. In your name, amen.